Alright everyone, now we have to talk about Russia and the war in Ukraine, of course. The other day, from Moscow, Vladimir Putin effectively announcing martial law in occupied portions of Ukraine. There are several problems with this, and none of them have to do with international law, because clearly international law means nothing in modern conflicts. It's routinely violated. The US violated it all the time in Iraq, told people to fuck themselves and they complained. Russia's ignoring it in Ukraine. They're telling the West to fuck itself. They don't give a shit. There's no attempt at decorum with regards to the movements of larger nations because nobody else can physically constrain them. Nobody can tell the United States what it can and cannot do. Nobody can force the Russians to do or not do something. Vladimir Putin is aware of this. It's funny when people keep complaining about international law. The UN made a condemnation. The UN has decided. China doesn't care, the US doesn't care, Russia doesn't care. To an extent, even the other major players don't care. India doesn't care that much. They're basically nuclear states and major economies. They don't give a fucking shit. He's claiming martial law, though, in places that he hasn't fully occupied. So it's going to be hit or miss. I guess if your town is controlled right now by Russian forces and you're in, part of eastern Ukraine, you're going to have to do what you're told. If you're in one of the areas where the Ukrainians predominate, then what does the order mean? It means absolutely nothing. The land doesn't belong to Russia because it's not occupied. It's basically might is right style conquest. This has become an annexation invasion. I find the mission creep by Russia a little bit jarring. I also find it jarring how there are people. I condemn the invasion of Ukraine, to be clear. I also condemn the brinksmanship of the Western world pumping Ukraine full of weapons. I don't think that it's particularly helpful at this point. I don't think there'll be a nuclear war or something, although considering the people that run many countries in the world right now are goddamn batshit, the possibility at least is there. Maybe get a few extra potassium iodide pills. Get another water filter from InfoWars or something, I suppose. When I look at the situation, though, a lot of people are excusing Russia's actions. I find it very funny because it's sort of following the same timeline as the invasion of Iraq, and yet there are people who don't see it as an imperialistic move, even though it has become annexation that's on the table. A few months ago, I thought it was about killing Nazis. And before that, it was restoring order and making sure that the sovereignty of Russian-speaking peoples in Ukraine would be intact. Well, that's gone by the wayside. This doesn't look like sovereignty. This is now for the purposes of annexation, not creating an independent sphere state or something like that. Regardless, though, I don't understand why Moscow's even engaging in that behavior. The problem is it makes you look impotent because you can't enforce it in half the areas you're claiming. It's like if the United States were to declare martial law in Liberia tomorrow without a troop on the ground and any major presence. Well, you have to actually occupy it first. You can occupy part of these regions, but half of them have been liberated or overrun, depending on who you back in this particular struggle, by Ukrainian forces and by mercenaries attendant to them. Of course, there are volunteers from multiple nations. Considering that Russia has already had logistics issues in the last month, it's not entirely clear that they're going to be able to continue stymieing the Ukrainians from taking more territory. In a final negotiation, which Zelensky should be pushed to have, by the way, an outright refusal to even talk with the Russians is leading to more death at this point. You might end up with that annexed region carved up, so Russia evacuates the Russian speakers to two of those provinces or something, absorbs them into Russia, and then Ukraine overruns the rest. The problem for a lot of the people here is that, let's put ourselves into Ukrainian shoes. You're in eastern Ukraine. It's largely impoverished. There's not a whole lot going on there. I'm sure that it's scenic, or at least, it was before it was cratered by mortars and tanks and shit. Scenic and reasonable. There's good farmland there and everything, but there's not a whole lot of economic or social progress. You're under the rule of the Ukrainian leadership. Up until literally Russia invaded, Zelensky was panned as being massively corrupt, inept, the Ukrainian government very corrupt in general, the military corrupt, kind of economically backwards. Now Russia has moved in, the situation at least for some time is worse because now it's a war zone. Even if the Russians win, Well, you're under another oligarchic state that basically functions the same way. The entire region is filled with corrupt individuals that lead. Look at Belarus, for example. Belarus right now apparently is insolvent due to sanctions and considering opening up a new front in Ukraine. That would be an escalation, by the way. Then another state gets directly involved with the war effort, or at least allows the Russians to move more material through Belarus, through Minsk. That would be yeah, it'd probably piss Zelensky off a little bit. I just think it's a clusterfuck. It never should have happened, by the way, if NATO's leadership in the United States weren't basically Biden, a drooling vegetable with Alzheimer's disease. I don't think that Putin would have invaded. I think he would have expected a beefier and more coherent response, and he wouldn't have dared to do so. Clearly, there would be no point to it. What's the use of taking a bit of territory and ending up getting shuttered from the world economy? More than Biden, by the way, has engaged in, probably, while everything internally goes to hell. And Trump can much more easily pull off the Kissinger-style thing. Biden, you know, he has problems. he's a nice guy, but like anyone else, he's got his issues. Mainly the fact that he doesn't know what he's doing. He won't even conduct diplomacy. The French took the fore. Why do you think that in the end Putin decided to invade? You think Emmanuel Macron scares him? Did you see that one picture of their meeting together and they're about 30 feet away from each other at the big table, and it wasn't a very familial environment? I think the negotiations broke down and failed. But the martial law declaration could be a blunder by Vladimir Putin. Because the problem is when it becomes clear that you cannot enforce it in virtually half of the regions that you're attempting to enforce it in, it's not Russia strong or something like that now, is it? It makes Russia look weak. And it feeds into NATO propaganda, which that's basically the propaganda that you see. Well, the Russians are using half-functional AK-47s, and they're even using bolt-action rifles now, and half their tanks have been taken by the Ukrainians and dragged off by tractors. It's hyperbolic, although they have suffered considerable losses. But you're handing on a golden platter to, you know, the enemies of Russia that particular talking point. It makes Vladimir Putin look uncoordinated, like he doesn't know what's going on. And by the way, if you're the leader of an Eastern Bloc state and you look weak, you usually get assassinated at some point. In the West, that's not a problem. You don't have the same level of court intrigue, for instance, in D.C. The fact that Joe Biden drools all the time and can only eat bran muffins, you know, he has to get the gluten-free ice cream at this point, I'm sure, doesn't mean that Kamala Harris literally pushes him down the stairs. In Russia, that can happen. It's happened before. Look at what Putin has done to several of his main political adversaries. It's a quasi-dictatorship at this point, although I'm sure that he listens very closely to what his oligarchs tell him to do. Some of them have resisted what's currently happening. That shows a level of disdain in Moscow that we haven't seen in a while. It's dating back to Boris Yeltsin times or something like that. By the way, him dying actually not that long ago, if I remember correctly. It's sad. He wasn't the best leader in the world, but, you know, good-hearted. Sort of like a Russian Jimmy Carter, I suppose. He brought the U.S. to the brink of having the same problems, by the way. I just find it a little bit bizarre and unhelpful for everyone. Ultimately, the best thing that could happen is everyone just fucking stops fighting and sings Kumbaya. But, you know, we won't be John and Yoko right now and live in our own heads. We have to look at things pragmatically. Unfortunately, peace is unlikely to break out in the near future, which means more suffering and dying. And everyone putting fucking flags on their profile. By the way, the fact that you have a Russian or Ukrainian flag on your Twitter handle doesn't stop a soldier from dying and his mother from crying. Just saying. That's about all. Peace out.